Hello, lovely learners. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is for you. I am Vi, and today we will be going over some common mistakes that English language learners make. I am going to turn myself up a little bit. Let me know if I'm too loud. It's just the filters are kind of working hard to, how do I say? To prevent the sound of some of the fans that are in my apartment being heard by stream, I guess, is a way to put it, you know. Yeah. So, I guess we can actually, I have some updates. I have some updates that we can go over. One, I am changing the time that I start stream on weekdays, which are days after, like, where I start stream after work, from 7 p.m. because I don't find that it works for me. Some days I want to take a nap after I get home from work, and a little, like, 1.5 hour, 1 hour nap, like, just feels very strange for me because it takes me quite a while to get to sleep in the first place. I do try and avoid napping during the work week just because it can mess up my sleep schedule, and my sleep schedule is very difficult for me to maintain in the first place. Yeah. It's rough sometimes. This week has not been the best for me, but I am feeling better, and I am excited to teach. I'm excited to go over some things. And honestly, some of them aren't unique to people who are learning English. Some of them are language learner advice, regardless of what language you're learning. And some of them actually are kind of culturally influenced, right? Because you have to bear in mind that, how do I want to say this? So you know how, like, different places have different cultures, right? So just because certain things are common or expected in Canada or in the US, particularly when speaking English, and particularly in the education system, does not mean that they are applicable to anywhere and everywhere, right? One of the things that we're going to go over is the fear of asking, and that fear can be very culturally related. And I don't want you to feel like everything I go over here today is things that you have to apply in your language learning journey. Some things might not apply to you at all. I just hope that people find some of the things we're going to go over helpful. Yeah. Also, if the music is ever too loud, let me know. If I am too loud, let me know. And let's get started. Actually, wait, do I have any more announcements? Right, I do. Oh, I'm forgetting my own announcements now, man. So my Reserve Cringe series is coming back this week. Thank you so much for everyone who's followed. Let's see. I will go over. So I think I said thank you to Haku Goddess already, and Ophelia Sita. So yeah, Miru, J Cyborg, thank you for following. It's 08MC, thank you for. Right, I got to Ben. Ben. I was talking about Ben, right? Gia0128, thank you for following. Chi, thank you for following. Chi is last. She is on the Minecraft server that I play on. Anyway, back to the announcements. Yeah, Berserkers. Okay, I'm getting nervous. Berserk Cringe is coming back this week. Yeah, so that's exciting. What else? I should turn the music down so that. Yeah. Okay. Should we just like get started or I think we should. I think we should. Okay. So I'm actually gonna turn the background music off. Just because if I want to use this for shorts, I might want to put different music behind it. And also, I'm watching my OBS to see how my voice is going, and it seems kind of mid today. Like sometimes it comes quieter, and sometimes it's very unbalanced, which I think is because of the fans. So, um, yeah. Okay. So, hi, my name is Vi. I am a certified English language teacher for speakers of multiple languages. So, that means that someone's first language might not be English and they are learning English. Mm-hmm. Advice for English language learners is not just specifically for them. As a uh, first, as English is my first language, like even I learn stuff from things like this. And so it can just be helpful for anyone. So, let's go over some common mistakes that English language learners make. 1. Apostrophes. Admittedly, apostrophes can be extremely frustrating. They go in different places for different words, and there's different reasons that they're in different words, and there are some kind of weird rules with apostrophes. Like, if someone has an S at the end of their name, how you have to put the apostrophe after their end of the name, even if it's like James is, you don't put like a S apostrophe S, you just put the apostrophe after the S. Like, stuff like that can become frustrating, and it's stuff that you get used to over time, right? But you also have to bear in mind that when you're speaking English, um, you don't necessarily have to know where an apostrophe goes. There's very few times where you actually do need to know like specifically where apostrophe goes in a word, right? Because as long as you know how to say a word correctly, like it's or yours or theirs or wasn't or couldn't correctly, you don't necessarily need to know where the apostrophe goes unless you're actually writing it, right? So, in stuff like that, like apostrophes can be more difficult to reinforce where they go and memorize where they go because you don't use it for a lot of the language learning skills that you have, right? So if you're using spoken English, you don't necessarily need to know where the apostrophe is. If you're listening to spoken English, you don't necessarily need to know where the apostrophe goes. If you are reading English, you don't necessarily need to know where the apostrophe goes, right? It's specifically when you're writing. And then on top of that, things like conjunction, like yeah. I guess it depends on the conjunction, but certain apostrophe, like connected words that you use in apostrophe, you don't use in formal English in like papers and stuff like that, unless it's like a direct quote, which I will get into more later on. But yeah, so apostrophes can be a struggle. Um, at some point, I can go over like apostrophes and stuff like that, but that is something that you might want to take a look at. Avoidance is the second one I have for today. So let's say you're learning a language, but you don't know how to say a specific word. And so you avoid saying that word for the day. And then you look it up on Google, you hear it said, but you've already started this pattern wherein you avoid saying the words that you don't know how to pronounce. Instead of, in that situation, asking someone else how to pronounce it or pronouncing it and risking not necessarily pronouncing it correctly, right? But that can be a really dangerous habit to create and to reinforce because you don't want to avoid certain words. You don't want to create that avoidance pattern, right? Um, because like although like the fear of failure, the fear of like saying something wrong, of being embarrassed in front of your friends or peers, that's perfectly valid. That is perfectly normal. In the classroom setting, and I can't say for classroom settings all around the world because like I don't know that for a fact, right? But let's say you're at a school in Canada, right? The majority of the time, if you don't ask how to say something, I mean, how is anyone going to know, right? So you do have to ask or risk saying it wrong. And a learning space shouldn't be a space that encourages behaviors like, oh, laughing at someone who says something wrong, you know? It should be like a space where you can make mistakes and people are just gonna be like, oh, okay, well, that's actually pronounced da 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 da, right? And, like, it's a space for growth. So instead of avoiding saying a word, maybe try asking one of your friends in your class, or asking your peer, or even asking your teacher. Um, I've had teaching experience at like a Kenny University level. So in that case, like they're really open to answering your questions about English there. Um, and encouraging you to practice spoken English because one of the only ways that you're going to get better at pronouncing things or more comfortable with pronouncing things is actually speaking English, right? And I mean, let's say that you avoid speaking English in the classroom. Like, does that mean that you're going out with your friends and only speaking English? Not necessarily, right? The classroom gives you a safe space where you can practice talking with other people in English, listening, practicing speaking, you know? So, and not everyone has like other people who they can practice their English with on a regular basis outside of the classroom, right? Because I mean, it's so much easier just to speak like a more comfortable language with your friends or with people you know if you all speak the same language, right? Uh, which is another thing that like you can get into difficulty with in classrooms is language grouping, right? Uh, because people who some people, because not everyone does this, but some people, they'll sit in groups of people who speak the same first language as them, and then you end up with a situation where certain groups are just speaking their first language and not actually practicing English in the classroom, which of course can be a difficulty, which is why people break those groups up by doing group work, by assigned seating, all kinds of stuff, right? There are all kinds of tools that teachers use to avoid that. Um, but the whole point of this little tangent is that hopefully you don't avoid using certain words in classes and try them out. Try saying stuff. Like, honestly, even as an English teacher myself, there are English words I struggle to pronounce sometimes. There are just some really tough words, or some words that, like, the sounds just, for some reason, are difficult for different people. Like, I don't know why, but it happens to the best of us, you know? And hopefully, I hope that you have a uh, healthy space to grow in your language learning journey. If you do ever want to hear a certain word pronounced that's appropriate, I'm not saying that I will say any word for anyone. I am saying that if you need like to know how to pronounce a certain word that is appropriate, okay, you can put it in chat and I will help you, okay? because I know how to pronounce most words in English. I do, so I can help you out with that. I've also been told that like Canadian and American accents can be easier for for English language learners from around the world. I guess like sometimes thicker accents or different accents can be harder to understand. So you can learn how to say it in my accent, and then you can maybe like find out how to say it in a different accent if you want to, you know? That could be fun. I don't know. Okay, next one, informal versus formal. Okay, so this one is one that is specific to my experience at Canadian universities. Um, they're like English might seem like it's a like chill, informal language, right? Like, I mean, we don't call people sir or madam or ma'am on a regular basis. At least where I live, you don't. But there is formal English, and particularly if you are going to go to a post secondary institution and you are going to have to write papers or speak in presentations, you may have to use formal English. And it's not okay, so it is nuanced, but it isn't nuanced in that once you know them, it's much easier to follow them, but some of them you wouldn't necessarily think of, right? So, like in formal English, you don't use acronyms, right? But you can use them. You can in the case that you say the full version of the word or the series of words, and then in brackets put the acronym that you would use for that series of words. And then you going forward in that paper or in the discussion, you can use that acronym. But you have to do the full version first because one of the important aspects of formal English is you can't assume that they know anything. Okay? You can't assume they know what a certain acronym means, which I know can be extremely frustrating, and you would think that like certain things are just universally known, but you can't assume that in formal English. Um, what's another one? Mm, right, modal verbs. Or, yeah, modal verbs, like get, right? Wherein the verb can have multiple meanings. Like, do you mean get as in retrieve? Do you mean get as in understand? Right? You can't use words like that in formal English because they're not specific enough. Stuff like that are some of the difficulties that people may have with formal English. Because, like, a lot of the time that you're learning English, it might be informal English. And then the idea that there is this whole separate, well, it's not separate, it's just there's a lot of things you can't use anymore. It makes it more difficult um, when it comes to formal English. And it's strange because where you actually end up using formal English is pretty much just in education related spaces, right? So if you go into research, you might have to use formal English in papers. Um, if you become an expert in your field and you have to write textbooks and stuff, you may need to use formal English there. Um, stuff like that. But like, if you just like work a normal 9 to 5, I mean, yeah, you're gonna have to use some formal English if you're talking with customers, perhaps, but it's not the same as formal English used in the education system. Because, like, by formal, in the case of working like a 9 to 5 and working with customers, it's more so just being polite, right? It's not avoiding a whole group of words or not using slang or common slang, because in certain cases you can use that when working, right? So it's a little bit different. Okay, so let's get on to the fear of asking. Okay, so this one is highly related to in it's it's highly related to learning environments, right? So let's say you are in a learning environment in a learning culture where asking questions in classes is seen as questioning the ability or intelligence of your teacher. In that case, you would likely not ask, right? But in the Canadian and American education system scene, not asking questions, depending on the situation, can actually be perceived as quite rude, right? So let's say people do a presentation on something and then no one asks any questions afterwards. That can be seen as an expression of disinterest in the topic of the presentation, right? Which is not nice to the people who are presenting. To avoid that, teachers have made it so that certain people are responsible for asking questions after a presentation. And most teachers reiterate the fact that asking questions isn't necessarily questioning the ability or knowledge of the presenter or teacher in a negative way. It could be just trying to seek more clarification or understanding of something you're curious about, which there's nothing wrong with, right? So I do encourage asking questions in spaces where it's safe to do so. So I am not going to tell you that the next time you go to class you should ask a ton of questions or anything like that, because that would be irresponsible of me, right? But if you are in a safe educational space where it is safe for you to ask questions, you might want to try it out, Just ask for clarification on something. It doesn't even have to be something that you don't actually know the answer to. It could just be something that you're like, well, I think it's this, but I guess it could be this, so I should probably ask, right? Just those kinds of things. And yeah, I mean, if you don't know how to pronounce something, if you don't know what sentence type a certain sentence is, I encourage asking. If you do not feel comfortable asking in the learning space that you're learning in, or if you don't have anyone to ask, I mean, I am also a English educator, so you can pop your questions in chat and I will try and get to them. So I can try and help you out there too, right? Because when you think about it, well, no, that's the wrong way to say it. Okay, so I am trying to create a learning space in which people are comfortable, the learning is accessible, and it's enjoyable, right? So I would hope that you don't find anything intimidating about me or my learning space, teaching space, whichever you would like to call it. And I hope that you're not intimidated or scared to ask me questions, because I love answering questions. I genuinely do. Because for me, people asking questions is not them questioning me. It's them showing interest in something that I'm passionate about. It's them showing interest in English and learning. And of course, that's something I'm going to encourage. Asking is not annoying. Asking is not rude. It's not mean. Depending on what you're asking, right? Because there's context to everything, right? But asking me questions to help your English language learning journey, absolutely okay. Just make sure they're appropriate, and I will try and help you as best as I can. Okay, so pronouns. Okay, so this is actually what I've found with my friends. Pronouns can be tricky. If you're talking about one person and you use multiple pronouns in your storytelling, someone who is fluent in English is likely going to be able to follow what you're saying. But if you are talking about a story of a group of people, and there's various different people, and you are talking about the same person, but you're consistently switching the pronouns that you're using, it may become confusing. So, what I would recommend is one, they as a pronoun is a lifesaver because it's consistent, right? Or you can just use their name, right? So if I am talking about a certain person in a group of people where there are going to be multiple people being talked about, I would just use their name. Because if I use multiple pronouns and there are multiple people in the story, then the person who is listening is going to get confused because they're not sure who exactly I'm talking about anymore. Like, who's doing what, right? So, just for some consistency and clarity, use their names or use they because you don't have to change that one like she, he, or sorry, she, her. You can just say they. It works pretty well. But then again, like, if there's a lot of people in the story, just use their names, honestly. Like, that is one of the things that might be a bit strange about English is that, like, we flat out use each other's names with no, like, additions or titles, which I know can, in other cultures, be considered rude. In English, it's not. Uh, it's just, yeah. I'm trying to think of a situation in which you would use a title, and aside from like doctors, because then you would say Doctor so and so. But outside of that, even teachers, they might ask you to call them Miss, Mr., Mrs. But most of the time, a lot of teachers just go by their name, in my experience. But yeah, when you're, especially if you're talking about like a group of your peers or friends, yeah, you just use their name. Yeah. um, Articles. Okay, so articles, I am not going to go deep into it, but let's say I am talking about the dog. The is an article in a sentence, right? And it needs to be there because I am talking about the dog. Makes sense, but I am talking about dog. Doesn't make sense, right? So leaving articles out, particularly in written English, some of the sentences may seem visually correct, but they're not because you do need articles. They're like necessary. And yeah, that's a common mistake with written English, particularly. Sometimes it happens in spoken English, but a lot of the time, in spoken English, people get used to the patterns in which you speak, and so maybe you do leave out an article here or there, but to whoever you're speaking to, it's just normal, right? But in written English, it's much more noticeable. Unrealistic expectations. Okay, so this one has to do with people being a little too hard on themselves. Okay, so recognition number one, learning English is hard. Recognition number two, human beings at all times have multiple things that they need to do and need just in general in order to be able to survive, right? So humans need shelter, they need food, they need rest, right? And so, especially when you're adding on people in who have moved or who have come to a place where they otherwise haven't lived before, where they're learning a new culture, they're experiencing culture shock. Like, the demands on your body and the needs that you have are extremely important, right? And so when you add this expectation that you should be like an expert in all your English classes, on top of adjusting to living in a new place, a new culture, new food, and not necessarily being fully comfortable with the language that's being spoken or being used, that's a lot, right? And so it becomes unrealistic, right? For someone to expect themselves to perform to a certain level because it's not humanly possible. Like, that's just unrealistic because it's unhealthy and because, I mean, everyone has limitations. That is a huge part of being a human being, right? Our abilities are limited, right? And we do need sleep, we need food, and we need a safe place, right? To stay or to not. Well, basically, we need like a safe place to rest so that we can survive, because humans are extremely vulnerable when they're asleep, you know? So, those expectations can become very toxic, right? They can become very negative, and they can make people feel very self conscious because they feel like they're not achieving what they should be achieving, even though they're not acknowledging all of the other factors that are going on, right? They're not acknowledging that there's a hierarchy to your needs and that honestly learning English might not be at the top of that pyramid, right? Da, da, da. Okay, confidence, self-esteem. Okay, how do I explain this one? Okay, so it is perfectly normal to feel self-conscious or like nervous when speaking a language that you're not fully comfortable with. I mean, I feel extremely self-conscious and nervous whenever I try and speak Spanish. I do, right? But a part of having confidence and self-esteem, especially when you're speaking in English, is saying things. Okay, so the tone might otherwise seem loud, okay? um, but saying things, yeah, with a certain amount of volume, which in Canadian and American culture may seem normal, but may seem loud to other people. That is true. That is true. I have heard that quite a few times. um, but yeah, when you're practicing your confidence, just like practice that. Like, and if you don't know how to say something, you can. That's okay. That's perfectly fine. You can try and say it. You can ask someone else how to say it. You know, it's just learning English is frustrating, right? It's hard. It's frustrating, but that does not mean that you are not good at learning English. That means that English is hard and frustrating. You are a good language learner. You are doing your best. And you should have confidence in yourself and your abilities because I think you're amazing. There you go. And because you're working hard, you're trying, which is a huge, huge thing, right? Not not everybody can learn a language, man. Like, confidence, self-sabotage. Ooh, okay, so this one. So, let's say that you think that you're good at something, right? You feel that you're good at something, but because you know you're good at it, you feel you're good at it, that does not mean that you aren't going to self-sabotage yourself in presentations. Because maybe you know you can do it, but you don't know how you're going to be marked on something, right? And so to ensure that you get a result that you're expecting, you self-sabotage so that you have something to fall back on when you get a lower mark or a lower grade. You can be like, oh yeah, I totally get where that's coming from because I didn't do this, this, or this. You know, it gives yourself that cushion that it's not unexpected, right? It's stuff that you expect, it's stuff that you know. And so it's understandable, right? It's not that you did anything wrong that you weren't expecting, right? It's not that you made mistakes. It's that you didn't do this, this, and this, which is like, I know that it's a way to preserve your self esteem. And honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I've done it throughout my university too, you know? But that doesn't change that it is a common mistake that English language learners make sometimes, you know? That they know that they're good at English, they're confident at their English, but then they don't actually practice what they need to say in a presentation, and then they purposely sabotage themselves in that presentation so that they know what kind of mark or what kind of review or feedback they're going to get. So that it's never something that they don't expect themselves because it's something they caused or it's something under their control or perceived as under their control. Confidence abilities. Ooh, okay, so this one. So let's say you don't like to read. Does that mean that you're not good at English? No. Let's say that you don't like to read, but you like to do research. You like to find out all these details about all these things online, which is technically reading. Unless you're watching videos on it, which isn't, you know? That's an ability that you can use to enhance your English experience because you can do that same research in English. And then you're connecting English to something you're passionate about and you enjoy. And then your confidence grows, right? Because you feel more comfortable with it because you use it more. It's just a little, you know, hack. Well, it's not a hack. Like, attaching something to something you enjoy to make yourself enjoy the second thing more is pretty common, right? Or at least I don't know if it can be called a hack. But yeah, like let's say you like doing dance videos on TikTok, right? What if you listen to songs with English lyrics, right? And instead of just like listening, you like look up the lyrics and you read the lyrics. Like you probably would still enjoy the song, right? But then you're adding that extra English exposure, right? Because you're also checking into the English that you're hearing so that you can attach it to the words that you can read, right? And that all attaches to the dancing that you enjoy and the videos that you enjoy. And so you're making learning English a more enjoyable experience to yourself and more relatable to yourself because you're going to be listening to those songs anyway, like probably multiple times, multiple takes if you're doing dancing videos, right? Because it takes effort. It's not easy. So stuff like that, by attaching English and adding that extra exposure to English, can really enhance your language learning journey and it can make learning English feel more comfortable and less stressful. Assumptions, first language speakers. Ah ha ha. So, some people assume that if English is your first language, it's better to learn from a teacher where English is their first language about English than it is to learn about English from a teacher who is from the same culture and whose first language is the same as yours, which is just not true. Why? Because one of the key things about learning and one of the things that makes learning easier is people who understand your own culture and your own experiences, right? So if I walked into a classroom where the learning culture is entirely different. And I was just, full out Canadian teacher, absolutely no adjustments to anyone else's culture or the environment. People might feel uncomfortable, right? People might have difficulty following along. People might not be able to focus as well. People might be confused because there are all kinds of adjustments that teachers make when they enter different classrooms, right? You have to assess what the environment is in the classroom. Are people more quiet? Do people talk a lot more? Do people prefer group or individual work? Are there people who, if you have a certain type of class, they just won't show up, right? But if you're not making those adjustments, then it makes it less accessible to your students, right? Because for people to learn, they ideally should be in a comfortable learning environment, right? So the assumption that just because I speak English as my first language, that I would be the best possible English teacher for you is wrong. Mm-hmm. Because it could very well be that someone who speaks the same first language as you, who also has English language knowledge, can convey it in a way that's more understandable to you and can do so in a more comfortable learning environment. Yeah. That's one of those interesting things you learn about when you're learning about teaching English. Mm-hmm. So yeah, this is the first version. So this is kind of like a work through mock-up type version of it. Uh, I think it went well. I think it did. Um, I'm trying to figure out what things I should change. I'm gonna change having the letters because I think that they're hard to read a little bit, like on this bookshelf here, like where I have the list of all the things we're gonna go over. Um, I do like this background though; it's cute. I do have to figure out where to put the credit for the background though. I'll figure that out. Yeah. And then maybe I'll set a certain amount of time for each, because these are just short little going over small things. Um, yeah. I think that going forward at some point, I'll be able to do more of a live demonstration. Like, especially when it comes to apostrophes and articles, like where I can write words and show examples would probably be helpful. Um, which is one of the things I am figuring out because I don't want to have my art program open it in the background. Um, because that actually causes some problems when it comes to typing and writing and the microphone, which is super frustrating. So, thank you for joining me for Common Mistakes English Language Learners Make version 1. I hope that you have a lovely Sunday. I hope that you have a lovely morning, lovely afternoon, lovely evening, whatever time of day it is for you. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. I really, really do. And thank you everyone for 60 followers. Thank you, thank you. It's super exciting. So this week I'm going to do the Tuesday, Wednesday streams for emotes. You might be wondering what I'm doing with those. I am trying to get some emotes together so that I can test out some PNG tuber programs so that I can use the 3 expressions that I have for myself, for my model, but also I can add in some transitions to some of the emotes so that I have a more broad range of emotions that I can express, I guess. Um, I'm gonna practice in some of those programs because yeah, I think that could help enhance like streams for learning and stuff like that. After I'm done the emote art, I do still have to do the chibi vibe, but I haven't decided when I'm gonna do that. I have some character art that I'm gonna do because I need it for a project that I'm working on where I am going to do some. I'm gonna do the parts of speech videos, but in a different way, and I'm gonna include some scenario examples, uh, which I think will be helpful with bringing some context to the content that's being taught, which I'm very excited about. I don't know when it'll be done. So yeah, those are in the works, and I'm excited. hmm So yeah, once again, thank you for joining me. I hope you have a lovely, lovely, lovely day. Uh, See you soon. Bye.